Hi, and welcome to today's podcast. I am super excited to have the amazing Cate Butler Ross here today with me to talk all about stories and storytelling. But first of all, I'm just going to hand you over to Kate directly just to let her introduce herself in her absolute greatness.
Oh, thank you very much, Jen. It's so lovely to be here. Yeah, so I am the author of a book called Soul Story, which is all about how to tell stories that call in your soul tribe. So my background is that I'm an ex features writer and commissioning editor on glossy magazines. And then for about the last 5 years, I've been teaching content and how to write books, basically. And my business is the Luminous. So I have the Luminous Press, where I publish books through, and the Luminous Media, which is my kind of courses and programs and membership, etc. So that's me.
Amazing. So let's just start off. Why you actually started, well, not why you started, why you wrote the book. I mean, I've got it here. So I'm reading it myself. But so give us a bit of background why you actually started or why you wrote it.
Well, so I've always been a writer, and I can't think of many writers who don't have that big dream of writing books. And so it's all I've ever wanted to do was be an author. And but I went on, I did journalism, and then whenever I went freelance, I started doing book editing for other people. And so I edited a few books and I consulted on a few books, because story is a big part. I was a features writer, so telling people's stories is a massive part of what I did, and learning how to figure out what people's stories are and what the hooks are and everything. So I did a lot of consulting on people's books and editing books, and then I started ghostwriting people's books, nonfiction books. And I just didn't have time to write my own books. And I was thinking, hang on, this is what I was supposed to be doing, and I'm doing it for other people. And I want to do my own. And then what happened, I was running, I decided to create a storytelling course called Soul Story for my membership. I think initially I started talking about storytelling a lot in my membership, and it turned into a course. And the course went really well, and I got such good feedback on it. And I just suddenly realized that actually the course would make a great book, and that I wanted to reach more people. I knew that storytelling was something that people really struggled with,
Mm.
telling their story, learning how to create content that was kind of compelling and different and unique. And I knew story was at the heart of that, but people were really struggling with that. And so I thought, I'm going to turn it into a book to make it more accessible, to reach more people. Yeah, and so Soul Story, I sat on it for about a year after turning it into a book, because various imposter syndromes decided to kick in. No one's immune.
Mm.
And then I eventually published it in January, so in March. So yeah, so
Nice. No, it's so I'm one of those people who's kind of struggles with like telling stories, and I think I don't know if it's like a left side right side brain thing. I'd have no idea, but I'm getting a lot better, and I am a lot better these days. But I used to when I used to create content. So a few years ago, I had a yoga business. I used to tell no stories at all. It's pretty much just facts and anything and everything, but no stories. So, but so why do you think it's so important to tell our stories within our content and generally for businesses?
there are lots of reasons. So um, obviously my background is magazines, and so content creation was my bag. So when I first started out, I started teaching content, and I think a lot of people reach for like copywriting skills. So copywriting is more like sales copy. The intention of copywriting is always to get someone to sell, but content writing is all about kind of creating a relationship building, and creating connection. And it's attraction marketing. It's creating a relationship so that when you are ready to sell something, it feels easy. It doesn't feel sleazy. It doesn't feel awkward. You've got a relationship. They know you well. They like you. They know that you've got what they want, and the yes comes easily. Um, but the problem was, you know, content marketing. I mean, social media, for example, which is one of the places that we can use content marketing, it's busy, it's noisy. There are a lot of people doing what you're doing. there are a lot of people sharing that kind of value driven content about your topic, and
Yeah.
about how to grow a business, about how to lose weight, about whatever.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of facts, and there's no shortage of information, and so it's really hard to stand out. So how do you create connection? How do you create value? How do you make your content something that they want to consume? How do you create a relationship with this kind of faceless audience through
Mm.
a computer screen? Well, the quickest way is to do that through telling your story, because people don't, they don't buy with their heads, they buy with their hearts. People buy from people they like, and
Mm.
they buy from people who are like them as well.
Yeah.
And the fastest way to help someone understand whether you are like them, or and whether you share their values, and whether they like you as a person, is to share stories about your life, the stories around your why, about why you do what you do. I am in this for the right reasons. It's not just about making money. It is because I really specifically care about you, and you can frame that in a story. And also it's a great way of letting people in, which is another really important element of
Mm.
content marketing, letting people in to who you are, what drives you. And yeah, so story is this most powerful, amazing way to create that connection, but it's also the quickest way to get people to listen to you as well, because as humans, we're really hardwired to listen to story and
Mm.
pay attention to story.
Yeah.
One of the most natural things, you pick up the phone, you speak to your mum, you tell her a story about your day. We love stories. We are
Yeah.
story machines. And so being a storyteller and learning how to tell your stories is makes your content unique. It makes it unlike any other coach or
Yeah.
whatever competitor there is out there. It's uniquely you. And yeah, so that is why you need to start learning how to tell stories, because it's so powerful.
Good. So let's say I have no idea how to write my stories. Where do you even start?
Well,
I know it's a whole can of worms there, but
here's a
I
can of
guess,
worms. But okay, well, I would just start. So let's say, I mean, most of your audience are business owners, small business owners mainly.
yep, business
Okay, so
ownership.
I mean, the first story that you're going to probably be telling is how it's not necessarily the most compelling story, I will point out, but it's a good entry point. The first story that you're going to be telling as a business owner is how you started your business. When did you start your business, and where did it come from? And so, really simply, how to figure that out would be, okay, well, there was a time when your business didn't exist, and there was a time when it suddenly did exist. And there was a moment when you had no idea that you were going to do this thing. And then there was a moment when you suddenly had this seed of the idea. And that's the essence of the founding story of your business. It's where you go from, I was doing so and so, I was unhappy, I was unfulfilled, something happened, and there's always something
Yeah.
that happens that changes everything. I had a conversation with a friend, and I had a light bulb moment, realizing that there was a business idea in this, um, it could be something really dramatic, like I got made redundant, and there's something that happens. Oh, there you go. So that's your story that propels you on to make that change. And then suddenly you're there and you're running that business. And if you remember that every story is about transformation, if you
Mm.
end your story in the same place, either physically or emotionally, or whatever, as you start your story, you haven't really got a story. But it's,
Yeah.
your founder story is the very first one. It's the transformation that you went from being not a business owner or not doing what you do
Yeah.
to doing what you do and kind of living that dream. So that's the first place to start. But there are so many other more interesting stories that you can be telling, like, your purpose story, like, why do you run your business? That's something that
Mm.
people can connect with, it kind of brings in your values. It brings in why you are the best person for this job. You are the best person to hire. So your purpose story is a great story to tell. But then there are lots of other stories which don't necessarily relate to your business, which give value. And
Yeah.
you have got this treasure trove of stories from your life where you've learned lessons and you've grown as a person, and you've had your perspective changed, or you've been through
Mm.
challenges, and you can share those stories with your audience, and that will create connection with them. and hopefully it will also give some kind of value and help them. And a lot of people have a lot of ickiness about like, oh, I can't share my stories. Like, who am I to share my story? But people love hearing stories, and it isn't about look at me. It is about learn from me, and that is the difference between a good story and one that is maybe a little bit more motivated by the wrong reasons, maybe.
Fair enough. Which is like, there's so many light bulbs already like going off, like, all sorts of things that I'm definitely going to have a look in the book later on as well, because I'm sure you included that all in the book anyway, so, so I can read that up. But for anyone listening and watching, how do you actually know what to put in a story? Is it literally just almost like, this is it, or is there anything that really should be in there?
Well, obviously you always have to know what the transformation is, the transformation
Mhm.
journey, but there are a lot of people put in a lot. I suppose knowing what not to put in is more
Yeah,
important
fair enough.
because
Yeah.
you've got to hold someone's attention
Hmm.
when you're telling a story, and we often tend to get a bit long-winded, perhaps. We might not really understand the point of our story. So if we haven't got a clear idea of what the lesson of the story is, we might go off on a tangent and like focus on something that's irrelevant. And then the person reading the story's mind will wander, and then they're not going to finish it really. So
Yeah.
you've got to always have a really clear idea of what is the value of this story? What is the lesson? What are the key points?
Mm.
What's the beginning? Where was I when I started out? What was the turning point? Where am I now? What's the transformation and what's the lesson? Knowing what those things are the absolute basics. What's the beginning? What's the middle? What's the
Mm.
end? But then as we move into different types of storytelling, and this is the kind of thing that you might do if you wanted to do a TED talk, for example, and you want to hold the um, captivate that room, hold
Mm.
the stage, not have anyone like, texting their friend or whatever. You want the
Yeah.
whole room to that's storytelling. If you look at any TED talk, most
Mm.
TED talks, they will be story driven. A lot of them will be story driven. And so to do that, there are lots of little extra storytelling tricks that you can include that kind of build the world of your story, that draw them in, that help your reader, your listener, however they're consuming your story, kind of create a bit of a movie in their mind. Because I think the thing to remember is that when you tell a story, you're not telling them exactly how it is. You're the person listening to a story, or when you read a story, you're
Mm.
creating that story, kind of co-creating that story with the person telling it. You're
Yeah.
you're imagining what the dress looks like, the car looks like, you're
Mhm.
imagining what the room feels like. And so there are a few little tricks that you can add in that helps trigger that world building. And that's when you're really kind of elevating your storytelling. So if you want to use storytelling for, to be a speaker, for example, and you want to be a
Mm.
keynote, those are the kind of things that you need to be diving into and being aware of when, telling your story on stage or in your book.
Nice. So, and then I know that it's a section within your book, and I haven't actually come round to it yet, but how do you know what story to actually tell? Because I mean, we've got, as you say, about God knows how many stories because of our background and etc. So how to know what story is actually relevant and what story to tell? Or does it, I guess, depend on the transformation, does it?
Well, you have always got to think about your audience
Yeah.
and the message that they need to hear, because you're not telling your story for your sake, you're telling your story for their sake. So
Yeah.
you've got to ask what's in it for them, what's going to be good for them. So you can't just tell any old story in any old situation. You've got to match your message to your story, or match your story to your message, I would say.
Yeah.
If you're doing it for business rather than just pure entertainment, you're going to think to yourself, well, what is the thing that I need them to understand or see
Yeah.
differently? How do I need to shift them? And then you find a story that matches that. Okay. And in my book, I talk about different ways that you can unearth all the stories you have. And so you kind of you get a storyteller's mindset. You start thinking, oh yeah, when that happened, or when this happened, when did I realize this myself? That's often the
Yeah.
starting point. What the lesson I want to teach you, when did I realize that for the first time? Do I have a story, or when was I reminded of that recently? That's the story you tell. But
Mm.
you can't tell the same story for every audience as well, because as a business owner, we have an audience and we know them really well. And the chances are when to tell a story for them. But there might be instances as a storyteller that you might go in and speak to a slightly different audience, and therefore
Mm.
your story is going to be different. I did a training with a group, and one of them was a professional poker player, and he said, like, I could go in and talk to somebody, share this story about being a professional poker player, but if I did it with my kind of colleagues who were professional poker players, they're not going to find that story interesting. However, he was also a life coach, and so when he went in and told that story to his life coaching students about how he became a professional poker player, that story resonated. It was interesting. It was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's a bit. I mean, obviously you've got to read your audience and know there are other people who are not going to resonate with that story, I don't know, a mother and baby group. They're going to think, my goodness, it's completely inappropriate. But it's about choosing, first, match your story to your message, and second, make sure the story is something that's going to resonate with your audience. Is it something that they can relate to? Is it something that's going to intrigue them? Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it has to be somewhat intriguing because otherwise you're not going to hold the attention, or they just get bored like halfway through, or what, if they even get
Yeah.
halfway through, I guess. So,
That that said, I think believing that you have to have something dramatic to share to have a good story isn't true. And
no,
often the most powerful stories are the ones that actually reflect somebody's life. The stories that actually where you think, oh my goodness, it's not just me, I've done that. That's how I feel. That's what my life looks like. Often they're the most powerful stories. And so
mm,
it's really worth remembering that the best story isn't the most dramatic or glamorous or intriguing. It's the true one. It's the one where someone hears truth in it. That's what makes a story compelling, is that it feels true to life, true to them.
and I guess it's also being relatable, isn't it? So, I mean, I follow so many these days, so many like mum accounts essentially, and when they write something about like chickenpox or whatever, and I'm just like, and like be them being tired, I'm just like, yep, I feel you. Yep, I can completely understand. Completely relatable. Yes. So,
It's true,
and
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 it's so important. And I was talking about this. I have a book writing group, and we were talking about it today. And we were talking about how in coaching often, or in business, you want to put the best foot forward, and you want to look like, I'm making six figures, I'm doing whatever the buzzwords are now. And we were talking about a client of mine writing a book which is like kind of the opposite, like almost like satirical. And I said it's a bit like that whole thing when Slummy Mummy, I don't know if you're familiar with that, that came in, and it suddenly went from having to be the perfect mum to actually I'm a completely useless, and I'm just
yeah,
winging it every single day. And that was just really appealing, because suddenly it felt real and it felt vulnerable. And the vulnerability side is so important.
yeah, I was gonna say it's not just sharing like the highlight reel, it's actually sharing like your I guess your genuine struggles as well, isn't it? Or that's your problem struggles. I guess you wouldn't necessarily, or you wouldn't, shouldn't, however you want to say it, necessarily share it if you're still in that sort of in that, if the I guess if the lesson hasn't been learned yet, would you say?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Well, I have, yeah, and no. I've kind of changed my view on this over the years, and I do think, Elizabeth Gilbert always said, like, share the scar, not the wound, which means if something's still raw, if you haven't processed it, if you haven't got hindsight, if you haven't got a lesson, if you haven't,
Yeah.
you're not sharing something, if you haven't learned something from it, you're kind of sharing something in a kind of maybe look at me way, or
Mhm.
and you turn your reader or your listener into a voyeur rather than
Yeah.
actually getting value from it. But I do think that maybe with the whole rise of social media, the way we share has changed and evolved. And while I think that's definitely true, there is a time when a story is not ready to share. There
Yeah.
are times when sharing it can be cathartic, but also can give value, because as you share it in the process, it's being cathartic, but it's also giving value. You are sharing your journey and your experiences, and you have something worthwhile to say about it then, right there. And then I think you can do it then, but that takes some discernment to figure out, you know, whether,
Yeah, yeah.
while you're in it, whether it's right to share or not, because you don't want to end up with a vulnerability hangover or anything like that.
No, 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 absolutely. So yeah, as you say, I guess it's to know when not to share a story just yet. So
Yeah, I think
just
if in doubt, maybe hold back. Um,
yeah,
unless unless you think about it and you realize that you're sabotaging, trying to keep yourself small, trying to hide, it's about self-awareness. But anyone who's into coaching or anything like personal development, you'll be quite fine-tuned to those things, or you
yeah,
become more fine-tuned to it. You'll know as a coach, you start to self-coach yourself and spot when you're hiding. You
yeah.
might not do it immediately, but you can, yeah, notice when you're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess telling stories is, as you said in the beginning as well, it's like a nice way, just not a nice way, but like a different way just to be unique as or show your uniqueness, I guess. Um, but also, actually lost my train of thought now. Becoming visible, I think that was it, about getting visible as well, because you then, I guess, stand out with your story, whatever that story might be, so you're getting potentially more visible as well. I think that's where I wanted to go. I
Yeah,
can't I honestly.
if you think about the kind of the leaders in your niche, uh,
Yeah.
if you're in coaching is a really good example. Like the main coaches, or you kind of
Mm,
know what their story is. Like, Tony Robbins, he talks about his rags to riches story all the time.
yeah,
It's a defining part of his marketing.
yeah,
Denise Thomas and Gabby Bernstein, they all share their stories over and over and over again. It's a massive part of their content. And it can be vulnerable and scary to do, but they're personality driven brands, and it's important. You can't just be a faceless expert,
no,
because that connection.
no, absolutely. And people have to keep like hearing your story, or like your story, because people don't tend to remember first time round necessarily. So I keep hearing different things, how many times people need to like hear or read a piece of
7,
content.
11. Yeah, I hear different ones, but it is quite a lot. It
Yeah,
is definitely upwards of 7 times before someone kind of notices you or hears that message, unless they're particularly primed and waiting for it. But they're probably not going to, because it's such a noisy space, and it makes sense. And people's attention
yeah,
spans have reduced massively as well.
yeah. I mean, I think the other day, I think someone said it's like 20 times now, and I'm just like, okay. So, you know, it's if anyone
It's
is.
messaging and standing out so important. You can't be vanilla. It doesn't
No,
matter how many times you show up. If you're vanilla, no one's going to notice you. You've got to
no,
find a way.
exactly. Exactly. So if anyone listening or watching this just, sort of doubting talking about the story, just tell your story, because someone, I can't even remember who it was, but someone said something along the lines of, we you know we just get it in our head that everyone reads our story. But that's not, it's essentially, I mean, look at the algorithms on social media, the amount of people that get your stories or your posts, it's just like minuscule. It's just like tiny. So um, it's just ridiculous. So, and then I guess that's why you have to also keep telling your stories, just so that you are even seen, and the people that actually want to, like your soul tribe, as you call it, and I call it, I love the little soul tribe. um they will eventually come. um but do you have like three top tips when it comes to sort of storytelling?
3 top tips. I suppose my first one is, I've already mentioned, is definitely that you're the best story is always the true one. So don't try and make it something that it's not.
Yeah.
Um, trust the story is enough. Trust that your story is enough. And it's remembering, the second one probably is remembering that when you tell your story, you also tell someone else's. You are enabling someone to feel seen. It's not just about you, like, oh, look at me, but when you tell your story of your struggle, of your challenges, of how you've overcome, or something that's you've been through, you tell somebody else's, and that creates a connection because they feel seen.
Mm.
So that's something to really important to remember. So always tell the true one. And then, whenever you doubt yourself in whether I should share this, know that you are telling somebody else's story at the same time. And that's so important. Imagine a world where then no one reflects you, no one, you go
Yeah.
online and no one has an experience like you, and you feel so alone. And then suddenly someone does
Mm.
reflect what your life is and what your struggle is, or where you are, or they've been where you were once. That is going to be amazing, and it's going to create a real connection with that person. So that's the second one. So make it true. Know that you're telling somebody else's story. Where there's so many, but the other thing I would do, and it's kind of linked and related, is, but don't be tempted by that kind of clickbait type stories, like, I was going to die, I thought I was going to die, or those kind of things. Because yeah, okay, well, maybe you did, but you don't need those stories. You don't need
Mm.
that drama to captivate people with a story. And I think it's a bit of a lazy way. You've got to think to yourself, what is really going to grab their attention? What is going to intrigue them? And it always comes down to, it comes back to that marketing thing, which is, how can I make them feel seen? How can I speak to their desires? How can I um, let them know that I understand what they're going through, what their problems are, what their struggles are, and use that as a hook rather than something clickbaity and
Yeah.
dramatic, which probably isn't going to follow through. Um, but there are loads that's kind of hard to to distill them down.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much, Kate, for coming on here today with me. I had a absolute lovely time. So many thoughts. I'm sure I'm going to go downstairs in a minute and just brain dump as I tend to do, and then write some stories probably. So, but thank you
Good.
so much for coming on. I will get all of your details and everything in the show notes. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you or wants to know more about you, that's all in the show notes for you. But thank you so much for coming on today, Kate. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.